them. Here at Beyond Verses, we will do a deep dive into an interesting book. Whether you're Christian, belong to another faith, or have no religion at all, you're welcome here. Because discovering timeless life lessons hits it in one of history's most influential books, the Holy Bible.
At first glance, this chapter literally just looks like a dry, ancient list of names, right? But if we peel back the layers, it's actually this beautiful, profound fable about community, sacrifice, and what it really means to have a willing heart. Let's get right into it. Okay, so picture this scene. You've got this sprawling, newly rebuilt city. The walls of Jerusalem are finally up. They're sturdy, they're tall, and honestly, they're a massive achievement of engineering and faith after a long period of ruin. But there's a huge, glaring problem staring everybody right in the face. The city is completely empty. I mean, it's basically a ghost town. And this perfectly sets up the central tension of our story. You see, God's work isn't actually complete until his people step up and occupy the space prepared for them. A rebuilt wall is just stones and mortar until a living, breathing community actually moves inside, right?
And you know, this brings us to a super relatable point about human nature and spiritual growth, the stark difference between building and maintaining. Think about it. The building phase, laying the bricks, fighting off critics, cutting that ceremonial ribbon, that's the exciting part. It's fueled by adrenaline. Everyone loves kicking off a massive project. But maintaining what's been built? Yeah, that requires a completely different kind of energy. It's a quiet, day in, day out commitment. Starting well is fantastic, but whether we're talking about moving into an ancient city or cultivating your own relationships, advancing your career, or nurturing your spiritual growth, maintaining the work is just as crucial as starting it. Finishing faithfully, that's the real challenge.
So how do they solve this ghost town problem? Well, Nehemiah 11:2 gives us the answer, saying, "The people blessed all the men who willingly offered to live in Jerusalem." And here is our first major takeaway. God's kingdom advances through people who are willing to leave their safety and their comfort zones. Historically, living out in the established country towns was way easier. It was predictable and it was much safer. The people who volunteered to pack up and move into Jerusalem were literally trading their comfort for God's purpose. And honestly, that translates so perfectly to today. It might look like choosing to serve in a struggling church, moving to a rural town, stepping up in a challenging workplace, or taking on a totally unrecognized ministry, simply because you're willing to answer the call. But let's be real for a second, this willingness, it came with a heavy cost. Moving into this new city wasn't some happily ever after where everyone just unpacked boxes and threw a massive block party. Not at all. Enemies were still actively surrounding the city walls. Moving to Jerusalem meant taking on a huge target on your back. It meant accepting greater responsibility and facing legitimate daily risks. It took true, gritty sacrifice to be the first ones to walk through those newly hung gates. And actually, following any true calling usually follows a very specific progression. First, you have to leave your comfort, then accept responsibility, and finally face the risks. It completely echoes Jesus' teaching about denying yourself and taking up your cross, doesn't it? Realistically, choosing to serve God, well, it might cost you your free time, your hard-earned money, maybe even your social popularity, or just your everyday convenience. But the core promise woven throughout this entire text is that the eternal rewards absolutely outweigh these temporary earthly sacrifices.
Which brings up one of the most profound truths from this whole migration. Availability is greater than ability. The folks who volunteered to uproot their lives weren't necessarily the most talented leaders or the richest merchants or the master builders of their generation. They were just available. They were willing. God so often uses available people long before he uses exceptionally gifted but totally unavailable people. So the takeaway here for us is simple. Don't sit around waiting until you feel perfectly qualified, perfectly trained, or perfectly ready to step up. Offer yourself first, and God will equip you for the work. Now, if we look at the actual society moving into this new city, we see this incredibly diverse cast of characters. You've got the leaders who settled first, then the priests and Levites who guided the spiritual worship. You've got gatekeepers and singers who physically protected the walls and inspired the people. And then, vitally, the ordinary families who built the actual day-to-day community. God intentionally recorded all these different names and roles because, frankly, every single one of them mattered. It proves that whether your role is preaching from a stage, cleaning the church floors, welcoming visitors, or just praying silently behind the scenes, no assignment in God's kingdom is insignificant. You should never compare your calling to someone else's because every single role is needed to make the city function. And I really want to highlight the behavior of the leaders here. True leaders lead by example. Period. The leaders in Nehemiah's day didn't just point fingers from a safe distance and tell the ordinary folks to go live in the dangerous, empty city. No way. They went first. They got their hands dirty. They completely refused to ask others to do what they themselves were unwilling to do. And man, what an ultimate model that is for parents, for pastors, for teachers, and for employers today. If you want to lead effectively, you have to physically demonstrate the exact character and commitment you expect from the people following you. So when you put all 5 of these vital groups together, the priests, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, and ordinary families, it paints this perfect picture of unity. You have people from entirely different tribes with completely diverse professions and backgrounds all coming together to populate Jerusalem. They formed one complete circle, working toward a single unified purpose. And this really shows us that people coming together, bringing their own unique, diverse roles, is exactly what makes the church and God's work so incredibly strong. It's a beautiful reminder that believers are meant to use their different gifts in unity rather than, constantly competing with each other for the spotlight. But you might be wondering, what was the actual glue holding all these diverse, moving pieces together? Well, it was worship. Worship was the absolute center of their national life. The text specifically highlights the priests, singers, and gatekeepers, because prioritizing that relationship with God over a mere human achievement was absolutely vital. Because think about it. It is entirely possible to build a highly successful career, engineer a massive business, and curate a picture-perfect family, all while completely neglecting your relationship with God. This story is a huge warning sign that success without keeping worship at the center just leads straight to spiritual emptiness. God desires our worship way before he cares about our earthly achievements. And this dynamic sets up an incredible contrast: faithfulness versus popularity. Let's be honest, popularity is the fame noticed by the world, right? It's the applause, the recognition, making it into the history books. But faithfulness, that is quiet obedience. And that is what is noticed by God. Most of the people listed in Nehemiah chapter 11 are literally mentioned nowhere else in all of Scripture. They weren't famous, they didn't have massive monuments built in their honor. But God remembered them, and he recorded their names, because God consistently rewards quiet faithfulness over worldly popularity. Which brings us to a really beautiful, reassuring truth to drive this whole thing home. God knows every single name. There are dozens of names recorded in this chapter, and to a casual modern reader just kind of skimming through, they might seem totally unimportant. But every single name mattered deeply to God. This shows us that God knows his people personally. Even when the world completely overlooks your efforts, your mundane tasks, or your hidden service, God knows your name. He knows your struggles, he hears your prayers, and he never, ever forgets your faithfulness. That is so powerful.
So as we wrap up this explainer, we can clearly see that God's kingdom is built by ordinary people with willing hearts. This empty city wasn't restored to life by a bunch of untouchable superheroes. It happened because everyday individuals accepted responsibility, embraced the sacrifice, and put God's purposes above their own personal comfort. So I want to leave you with one final question to spark your own reflection today. Are you willing to step out of your comfort zone to let God accomplish extraordinary things through you? Take a second to really think about what your empty city might be and whether you are willing to move into it. Thanks so much for learning with me today,